Yo guys, it's your boy Don alongside with my dad.
Yo.
It's been a hot minute, but we're back,
back.
and we're going to be predicting the NCAA tournament.
This is going to be great.
I'm actually going to let my dad start things off here.
So we're going to kind of break this down into sections, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over our picks all the way down to where we have them sitting in the final four. So we're going to do the upper part of the bracket on the left-hand side first, then the bottom part of the bracket second, and then we'll put them into the final four. Then we'll move on to the right side of the bracket first rounds and bring them into the final four, and then we'll go down to the bottom bracket, put them in, and then eventually go from there. So let me go ahead and start it off. It's going to be a rocky ride, guys. It's going to be wonderful. If anybody is going to win this thing, I'm just going to get straight to the point. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So I have ALST going on to play against Auburn in the first round, and I have Auburn actually winning that game, advancing on to the second round. Then between Louisville and Creighton, I have Creighton advancing, beating Louisville. Then going on to Michigan versus UC San Diego. This is one that I had to think a little bit because the record can be misdeceiving. This is where a lot of spoilers come into everything. And I have, unfortunately, out of it, I have Michigan winning. I think Michigan's a better team than UC San Diego, so we'll see how that works. Then we have Texas A&M playing against Yale. I have Texas A&M winning that game. Then we go down to another bracket thing where we had San Diego, North Carolina. I have San Diego State actually moving on to the first round, playing against Mississippi. Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a lot there. I don't think San Diego State will be able to put up a fight against Mississippi, so I have Mississippi winning that game. Then we have Iowa State and Lipscomb playing, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing their name. I think Iowa State wins that game to play Mississippi State. Then we go down to Marquette versus New Mexico. I have Marquette winning that game. Then we have Michigan State versus Bryant, and I have Michigan State moving on. Then when here we go between Auburn and Creighton, I have Auburn moving on. I have Texas A&M beating Michigan, so this would be normal and everything. I think Texas A&M, well-rounded, has a better ball team, a little bit better offense there. Then I have Iowa State beating Mississippi to move on, and then I have Michigan State beating Marquette. No, that's not the Marquette Explorers, guys.
I hope you don't know who they are.
Okay, so that being said, let's go on between Auburn and A&M and my prediction. I have Auburn advancing to play. Let's go on to Iowa State versus Michigan State. That's going to be a great game. But I'm a bigger fan of Tom Izzo. He's been there before, so I think he has the better chance. I think Michigan State will win that game. Now, going down to the Final Four, it's one I've been watching all year. I think Bruce Pearl has done great with Auburn all season long. I think he has done an excellent job coaching them. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say Auburn makes the Final Four.
Ooh, okay. So here's for my first round matchup. The first round matchup is Auburn, and I actually have ALST moving on to it. I believe that's Atlantic State or whatever. But I have them moving on to the actual first round of the tournament. I have Auburn moving on. For Louisville and Creighton, I actually have Creighton moving on. So the matchup will be Auburn and Creighton. But again, we'll get to that here in a second. Michigan and UC San Diego, I have Michigan going to it. Texas A&M and Yale, I have Texas A&M going to it. For the next one, we have Mississippi State, and I actually do have San Diego actually moving on to it. So sorry, North Carolina. I apologize, but
You have San Diego State moving on?
yes, I have San Diego State moving on. I think it's going to Mississippi. I mean, obviously, it's going to be going to Mississippi. How about Iowa State and
Lipscomb?
I'm going to have Iowa State move on in that one. And then Marquette and New Mexico, I actually have New Mexico moving on. Sometimes you got to go with a couple of the lower seeds, or 10 or lower, if you know what I mean.
So you picked New Mexico?
Yes, I picked New Mexico. And then finally, Michigan State and Bryant. I have Michigan State moving on. So 2 Michigan teams for now moving on. For the second round, I have Auburn and Creighton. I have Auburn moving on. Michigan versus Texas A&M. I actually, spoiler alert, I have Texas A&M moving on. Mississippi and Iowa State. I have Mississippi moving on.
Wow.
And then finally, New Mexico and Michigan State. I have Michigan State moving on. Auburn and Texas A&M. I do think Auburn is the better team, so I have Auburn moving on. Mississippi versus Michigan State, though, I think Michigan State's the better team. Sometimes you gotta go bold a little bit, and that's why I have Michigan State moving on. And then for the Elite Eight, which the winner advances to the Final Four, Auburn and Michigan State, I think Auburn advances to the Final Four.
All right. So pretty similar in picks minus a couple. I've written them down, which ones you picked, so that way we can kind of go as we get on. Now let's go to the bottom side of the bracket, and this is where we will get into Florida and Norfolk State. Now keep in mind, Norfolk State has done some shockers here. However, I expect no shocking here today. Off of this one, I think Florida moves on. Now let's go ahead and talk about UConn and Oklahoma. UConn has a chance to go for the what?
Three-peat.
The three-peat.
Like the Chiefs.
Like the Chiefs.
But the Chiefs suck, though.
Now, just like UConn, they're not going to get the three-peat, unfortunately. I hope not. I think Oklahoma, being the underdog, their records are pretty comparable minus the loss ratio here. 3 more losses, but I think Oklahoma has what it takes to beat UConn, especially after UConn getting tossed out of the their conference tournament. That being said, between Memphis and Colorado State, I see Memphis going on. Maryland and Grand Canyon, unfortunately, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. I have no desire to go to the Grand Canyon right now, and I think Maryland's going to win that game. Missouri and Drake, this is where we pick. I could have gone with Drake, looking at Drake's record as 30-3. However, they are a different conference than what Missouri plays in. I like what Dennis Gates has done with Mizzou this year, so I'm going to go on with Missouri to advance. That being said, we get into Kansas, hold on. I messed up on something. Texas Tech versus North Carolina Wilmington. I have Texas Tech moving on. Sorry. I kind of screwed up on that one. Then we have Kansas versus Arkansas. This is a battle between John Calipari with Arkansas, first season there, and Bill Self, who's had a lot of trouble in Kansas. This year has probably statistically been one of his worst years that he's had at Kansas. A really rough year, getting his team to really gel. Now he thinks, Bill Self said a lot of stuff that he thinks he's ready to go, and he thinks there's no better time than now. I kind of disagree with that. However, I do think Kansas will beat Arkansas. That being said, St. John's, another team that has played very well, and that's Rick Pitino. He has done a great job coaching St. John's, turning them around and everything. It's really a wonderful story listening to that. I think St. John's wins that game. That being said, let's go ahead and go on to my next rounds between Florida and Oklahoma. I say Florida goes on and moves. Memphis versus Maryland. I think Memphis, being the underdog, I like their team. You can never doubt them. I think they beat Maryland and move on. Then I had Missouri and Texas Tech playing. Unfortunately, I just think that Texas Tech is a little better than what Missouri has, and I think that Texas Tech will win that and advance on. Now, between Kansas and St. John's, with the way the Kansas has played, nothing in my eyes tells me that Kansas is going to move on. Further past that, I think St. John's gets the win, so St. John moves on to the
Sweet 16.
Sweet 16. Now, we go to Florida and Memphis. This is where it kind of gets trickery and everything. I think Florida holds it down, and I think Florida wins and advances on to the Elite Eight. Then we have Texas Tech versus St. John's. This is going to be a great battle. I like both teams. Unfortunately, I think St. John's is the better team, so I have them actually going and advancing to the Elite Eight. So now we're going to go between that and we're going to kind of see things between Florida and St. John's. I expect two good matchups. Don't underestimate Rick Pitino. He's been here before. He knows what he has to do. I think they move on to the Final Four to play against Auburn.
All right. So for the first matchup, which is Florida and Norfolk State, I actually have Florida moving on. With Connecticut and Oklahoma, I actually have Oklahoma moving on as well. For Memphis and Colorado State, I think Memphis is going to move on. And then Maryland and Grand Canyon, I also have no desire to visit the Grand Canyon. I have Maryland advancing to it as well. You know, something I do want to comment for a couple seconds on Mizzou, aka Missouri, is they have been on a streak lately. Like, they've been losing quite a bit again. But they have had a big turnaround. That's one thing you got to mention. This is the year, after a horrendous last year, this has been a turnaround year. So I have Missouri going on to the next round. And between Texas Tech and North Carolina and Wilmington, I have Texas Tech moving on. For Kansas and Arkansas, I have Kansas moving on. And St. John's and
Nebraska,
Omaha, I have St. John's also moving on to that one. So basically, our bracket is the same
Pretty much
for
on
that
this side.
for that round, but we still gotta go deeper in this. Florida and Oklahoma, I do have Oklahoma moving on. Memphis and Maryland, I actually have Maryland moving on. Now, just like Dad said, Missouri, and also in my opinion too, like I said, with how they've been losing a little bit lately, I don't think they're going to get that deep of a run. So with that, I actually have Tennessee Tech moving on. And in Kansas and St. John's, sometimes you got to go a little bit bold. I actually have Kansas moving on to the next round.
Wow, Bill Self would be happy with you.
I hope Bill Self watches this video. Nah. Anyways, Oklahoma and Maryland, I actually have Maryland moving on to the next round. And then Texas Tech and Kansas, I have Kansas moving on to the Elite Eight. Now, in my opinion, in the Elite Eight between Maryland and Kansas, I do think Kansas's run will come to an end to Maryland. So with that, it's Maryland, it's Auburn and Maryland in the Final Four.
All right, so we're to the Final Four on that side. Let's get into the right side of the bracket, upper portion, where Duke, I have SMM actually advancing to play against Duke. I don't think there'll be a match for Duke, and Duke moves on. That being said, then we have Mississippi State and Baylor. Baylor's been another team that has had a lot of trouble this year. I just haven't seen very well play out of them execution-wise, defensively and offensively, and in their conference tournament, really lackluster. So I'm going with Mississippi State to beat them. Then we have Oregon and Liberty. I have Oregon going on. Arizona and Akron. I have Arizona going on. Here's one, Birmingham Young versus VCU. This is one where I have an underdog. You can never underestimate VCU. I think VCU wins. Then we have Wisconsin versus Montana. Unfortunately, I just don't foresee Montana being able to beat Wisconsin, so I have Wisconsin going on. Here's another one, St. Mary's versus Vanderbilt. Can never underestimate Vanderbilt. I have Vandy actually beating St. Mary's. Alabama versus Robert Morris. I've been a big fan of Alabama this year, and you can even ask him. I've paid attention to them. They have a great team. So I think Bama goes on to the second round. Now, let's get into our second round. I have Duke and Mississippi State. I think Duke is high power, fast from the get-go. I think Duke moves on. Oregon and Arizona, like both teams, I just think Oregon has the upper advantage, even though they're the underdog. Then between VCU and Wisconsin, I think Wisconsin moves on. Then Vandy versus Bama. Unfortunately, Vanderbilt is no match for Alabama. Bama wins and goes on to the Sweet 16. Now in the Sweet 16, I have Duke, Oregon matching up. I think Duke is going to win that great game between Wisconsin and Alabama. I think Alabama has the best chance to move on there. So I'm moving Alabama on to play against Duke. That being said, Duke and Alabama, this is going to be a great game, guys. I know a lot of people want to see Duke get back in there. Unfortunately, I just don't think Duke has it. So I think Alabama actually moves on, and they go to the Final Four.
That is an interesting pick right here.
It is.
But now for my turn, Duke versus I actually have AMER advancing to the first round of the tournament, but
Okay.
they're gonna get crushed by Duke. So Duke is advancing. Mississippi State and Baylor. Mississippi State's probably gonna hate me, but I am gonna go for Baylor in that one. I mean, sometimes you gotta pick. Oregon and Liberty. I do have Oregon moving on. For the next matchup, we have Arizona and Acorn. I have Acorn. I have Arizona moving on in that part. I'll be turning. BYU and VCU. I have VCU moving on to the next round. Wisconsin and Montana. I actually have Wisconsin moving on. St. Mary's and Vanderbilt. I have St. Mary's moving on. And then Alabama and Robert Morris. I have Alabama moving on to the next round. Duke and Baylor. I have Duke moving on to the Sweet 16. Oregon and Arizona. I actually have Oregon moving on. Good in football. They might be a little bit good in basketball this year.
They are.
VCU and Wisconsin. I actually have VCU trying to go out on a little run here. They're trying to get on a little something here. So I have them moving on. And then St. Mary's in Alabama. I have Alabama moving on. Duke and Oregon. I have Duke moving on into the Elite Eight.
Elite Eight.
And then VCU and Alabama. I actually have Alabama moving on. Now, winner to the Final Four is Alabama. You're going to hate me more than Mississippi State. I'm going to go for Duke to advance to the Final Four.
All right, so now we're going to go back. We're going to go down to the bottom portion of it, and this is one interesting. Kelvin Sampson trying to get a win, get a championship there in Houston. He has a great opportunity to do that. And then you have SIU Edwardsville. So yeah, SIUE. And unfortunately, I just don't think SIUE can hang with the powerhouse that Houston is. I would be scared to play against Houston, honestly. So I have them winning. Then we go to Gonzaga and Georgia. You know, I like Gonzaga, but they really haven't been, again, this year well. Yeah, they did win their conference tournament, which, a lot of people thought they should have had a better seed. I just don't see it. I think the underdog Georgia actually wins this one against Gonzaga. That being said, Clemson and Purdue, or Clemson versus McNeese State, I have Clemson winning. Then we have Purdue and High Point. Don't know enough about High Point. Never really watched a game from High Point. Never seen them play. The record's good. I just have never seen them play. That being said, I am going with Purdue to beat High Point. Then in the next bracket, I have Xavier moving on to play from the first four to play in the Illini. I have the Illini actually moving on. Then Kentucky and Troy, and that is not Troy, Missouri, guys. That being said, Kentucky has a very good team this year. I see them going on to beat Troy. UCLA versus Utah State. I have UCLA winning that. And then Rick Barnes, Tennessee. He's done a great job with that program. He's trying to get himself in there to win a national championship. So then I have Tennessee moving on. So now I have Houston and Georgia in the second round. I think Houston will beat Georgia. Clemson and Purdue, as much as I like Purdue, I think Clemson's the better team, so I have Clemson going on. Between the Illini and Kentucky, two great teams. I would love to see the Illini move on, but Kentucky just shows where they're really coming in. I think Kentucky wins this one. That being said, between UCLA and Tennessee, again, I just think Tennessee has a better power, and I think they will wind up winning and advancing to the Sweet 16. Between the Houston and Clemson, good game going on, but again, Houston, just too much for them. I think Houston moves on to the Elite Eight. Between Kentucky and Tennessee, this is going to be probably the best showdown right here between those two states. It's always awesome to watch a game between Kentucky and Tennessee. I like both teams. That being said, I think Tennessee's the better team. Now, we go on to the Elite Eight, and a lot of people are going to be shocked about this. I could say Houston's the better team, no doubt about it. However, I think this is where Tennessee will come out and shock everybody. And I think Rick Barnes brings his A game. These are two people that are hungry to get themselves past that hump into the Final Four and into the national championship game. Unfortunately, I think Tennessee outlasts Houston, and they will be playing against Bama in the Final Four.
Alrighty. So for my side of the bracket, Houston and SIUE, E means Edwardsville. Edwardsville is going to get crushed. Like, I'm even going to do a score. Okay, maybe I'm just hating on them a little too. Maybe I'm just hating on them a little too much. You know, sometimes there's a first time for everything.
Right.
You know, first time in this biggest stage. This is the biggest stage you can ever be. But I think it's going to be too much pressure, to be fair. So I have Houston moving on. Gonzaga and Georgia. I do have not Gonzaga. I actually have Georgia moving on. I'm in the bracket. Clemson and Morehead State. I have Clemson moving on. Purdue versus High Point. I think this might be one of their only times in the tournament for High Point, so I have Purdue. Illinois, and with this one, I actually have TEX, probably Texas State, maybe.
Yeah, it's Texas.
Yeah, it's Texas. I got
The
that
Longhorns.
right. I got that right. I think the Illini is going to move on. The Illinois Illini, Fighting Illini. Kentucky and Troy will go to Kentucky. And then UCLA and Utah State, that's going to UCLA. And then finally, for the first round, Tennessee versus Wolfhard. I have Tennessee moving on. My dad was probably going to be a little scared that I was going to choose Wolfhard.
Wolford or whatever you want to call it.
But Houston and Georgia, I actually have Houston moving on to the Sweet 16. Clemson and Purdue, I have Purdue moving on. Purdue's one of the better teams out there. Illini versus Kentucky, I think Kentucky's going to move on to the Elite Eight. And then UCLA and Tennessee, I have UCLA moving on. For the Sweet 16, I have Houston going on against Purdue. I have Houston moving on. And then Kentucky and UCLA, I actually have Kentucky moving on. And then for the Elite A, I actually have Houston beating Kentucky to go to the Final Four. So that will be the Final Four. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the Final Four predictions, including the championship. And I'll let him go first.
So you want me to say who's
advancing to the championship and who's winning the whole entire thing.
So, I have Auburn and St. John's in it. I like both of the teams. I like both the head coaches and everything. I just think Bruce Pearl has put together a great team this year. So I see Auburn making it to the national championship game. Then Alabama and Tennessee. Again, two great teams. I like them both. I really do. This one took a lot out of me to go ahead and figure out who I really wanted to go in there. But at the end of the day, I think Tennessee is the better team over Alabama this year. So Tennessee will go on to the national championship game to face Auburn. This is going to be a great game, guys. You have Auburn, who's in Alabama, and then you have Tennessee that's in there. Tennessee, both of these coaches are looking to win a national championship on the stage. I think Tennessee wins it all.
All right, so for my Final Four, it's Auburn and Maryland. I have Auburn moving on. I just think they are the better team over Maryland. So, unfortunately, Maryland's magical run will come to an end in the Final Four in April, by the way. And then Duke and Houston, I actually have Houston moving on. I do think Duke, close, but not close enough to making a championship game appearance. So, for the finale, for the championship, it is Auburn versus Houston. The drum roll is Houston. I have Houston winning the national championship game.
And that's a fair point taken, everybody. I mean, this year I think is probably one of my hardest brackets to pick, just because there is just really a change of things. There are so many stacked teams on here. I like all these teams that they actually have in here. Unfortunately, I just think it's Tennessee's year, and it actually kind of comes truthful. Our brackets are fairly similar, minus some changes. We go all the way with Auburn. However, Houston ends for me at the Elite Eight. So we'll kind of find out who has the better bracket towards the end of things.
And that's it for now. So if you guys want to see more content like this, smash the subscribe button, smash the like button. I'm actually thinking about later on in March maybe doing some UFL predictions because I would like to see if the UFL does good. And it's going to be in its second full season in the full UFL combination between the XFL and the United Football. It's combined. And you know how it is. But until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.